Hello and welcome to our program. A lot of interesting ideas are being discussed in the media that help ensure successful talks between North Korea and the United States in the near future, among which is an idea to exchange North Korea's nuclear freeze and partial lifting of economic sanctions. Are they going to happen or not? Stay tuned on This Week's Peace and Prosperity.
With North Korea and the U.S. preparing to resume working-level denuclearization talks, both sides are seeking ways to gain the upper hand in negotiations. There were reports citing a White House insider that Washington was considering a temporary suspension of a ban on coal and textile exports from North Korea in exchange for the dismantlement of the Yongbyon nuclear facility and a nuclear freeze. Speaking at a press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus flatly denied the reports, dismissing the idea of trading a nuclear freeze for sanctions relief. In a series of summit talks following the Hanoi summit, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has stressed the issue of security guarantees rather than sanctions relief. During last month's North Korea-China summit, Kim reportedly told Chinese President Xi Jinping that there's no need for nuclear weapons if the U.S. recognizes the regime and drops its hostile policy towards it, adding he wants to normalize ties with the U.S. Diplomatic experts believe the highest level of security guarantees that the U.S. can offer include an end-of-war declaration or start of peace treaty talks. It remains unclear, however, how North Korea will react to these options. Given the apparent gap in their positions at the previous Hanoi summit, attention is turning to what demands and concessions each side will make this time.
For today's discussion with an expert, we are pleased to have Professor Kim Hyun-wook, a professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for inviting me.
The first question is on the State Department's reactions to the Korean media's report that Washington was considering lifting some of the economic sanctions on North Korea for North Korea freezing the Yongbyon nuclear complex, as well as reporting its nuclear missile facilities and programs. But Stephen Biegun and the spokesperson of the State Department categorically deny the veracity of this Korean media's report. Is there freezing being considered in Washington, D.C. as a viable option, representing more flexible approach to North Korea?
Yes, I think, State Department made it clear already that, the Yongbyon facilities and the freeze of nuclear production. The U.S. made it clear that nuclear freeze is not the ultimate goal of U.S. policy towards North Korea. But I think more important than that is what kind of corresponding measures the U.S. is willing to give to North Korea. I think, Korean Representative Lee Do-hoon and Biegun, I think they have talked about this already. Maybe I think they have coordinated about this and come up with the agreed, outcome. And I think, they might have some kind of, finalized card to talk with North Korea right now.
Don't you think the United States needs to show more flexibility in terms of accepting step-by-step approach as opposed to all-or-nothing approach or all-in-one approach?
I think President Trump wants to make a deal with North Korea, or at least to manage the North Korean behavior so that it would not be more provocative at the end of this year or early next year. But it doesn't mean that President Trump wants to have a bad deal. It wants to have a good deal. Even though it's a small deal, it should be a good enough deal so that it would proceed with North Korea issues for a good outcome in his re-election phase.
I see, very interesting. What strategies are being discussed in the United States to prepare for the next round of talks with North Korea? We'll connect with Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Hello.
Right. 안녕하세요. 감사합니다 for having me here on your program.
What strategy should Washington employ in working level and high level talks for possibly a third Trump-Kim summit meeting?
The U.S. negotiators need to convince their counterparts that we need to make significant progress towards a document to fully denuclearize North Korea. So far, the counterparts to Special Envoy Steve Biegun have been authorized to speak about everything except denuclearization, which is, of course, the topic that we need to make progress on.
Well, what concessions should Washington secure from Pyongyang?
What we need to have North Korea do is fully commit to the UN definition of denuclearization. Up till now, Pyongyang has been insisting that denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is global arms control, that they'll go to zero nuclear weapons when the U.S. and other nuclear powers do. That's not what's required under the 11 UN resolutions. We also need to have North Korea commit to fully abandoning not only the production facilities, but also its existing arsenals. And we need to have North Korea commit to a full and robust verification protocol, similar to what we had with the Soviet Union in arms control treaties such as INF and START.
All right, thank you very much for joining us as an expert to comment on these important issues.
Yeah, okay.
Professor Kim, you just heard Bruce Klinger, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. It seems like he is very adamant in insisting that it should be North Koreans making concessions, and the concessions are in the very long list.
Yeah.
Would they be acceptable to North Koreans?
I think Bruce Klinger's voice is very hardline. He has been and he is now and always, I think he will be hardline in the future. But from the point of negotiator as Steve Biegun, I don't think Bruce Klinger's idea would be really helpful. I mean, it's a good point that his voice is pretty much the majority of voices in Washington, D.C. So I think, the Washington, D.C. people looking through what happened in Singapore and Hanoi, I think they're very skeptical about the North Korean intention this time, too.
All right. To broaden our perspective, we'll also hear from an expert here in South Korea. We sat down with Honorable Mr. Park Ji-won, a veteran lawmaker at the National Assembly from the Party for Democracy and Peace. He's a leading expert on North Korea, and we discussed his take on how North Korea-U.S. talks should be developing. Let's take a look.
폼페이오 장관의 최근 발언도 라디오 인터뷰를 통해서 북한의 안전 보장에 길을 모색하겠다. 또 미국에서 점진적, 단계적 이러한 길로 가는 걸 보면은 결국 동결의 수순을 향해서 가는 거고. 그러나 어떠한 경우에도 북한의 경제 제재 대압박이 가장 성공한 트럼프의 정책이기 때문에 만약 실무회담에서 영변 플러스 알파를 미국 전문가들을 초청해서 폐기한다고 하면은 단계적으로 행동 대 행동으로 미국도 경제 제재 완화 조치를 할 것이다. 이렇게 봅니다.
Professor Kim, we know very well Honorable Mr. Park Ji-won has been the expert on North Korea and inter-Korean cooperation since the days of the Kim Dae-jung administration with the Sunshine Policy. What do you take on his comments on United States is practicing strategic denial? And he seems to be very positive of the outlook of upcoming negotiations between the United States and North Korea.
Mr. Park's comment is that the current situation seems like the policy is going to the nuclear freeze. It seems like he's pointing out that the U.S. policy towards North Korea is more substantially on the nuclear freeze rather than complete denuclearization, which seems very impossible practically and realistically. But this is, I don't think, very rosy picture for the Korean Peninsula issues, because U.S. experts have been, and officials have been repeatedly mentioning that U.S. policy towards North Korea is CVID or FFVD, never recognize North Korea as a nuclear state, even though realistically nuclear weapons capabilities of North Korea
and
is a reality.
Right.
So there's a gap between the policies and reality. But the reason why the U.S. cannot abandon its policies, not recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state, is if once the U.S. does that, these security issues and alliance status in Northeast Asia is totally becoming chaotic.
Former acting director of CIA of the United States, Mr. Michael Morell, wrote a very interesting op-ed in the Washington Post recently. And in that op-ed, Mr. Morell argues that next step with North Korea should be more flexible, that the United States would offer limited sanction relief, allowing the reoperation of Kaesong Industrial Complex, which is in suspension for a long time, for North Korea taking important steps toward the freezing. Is Mr. Morell's opinion is a reflection of the general consensus inside Washington?
What if that kind of sanction relief and economic situation is allowed to North Korea? Would North Korea really continue their pathway towards the CVID or FFVD? That's kind of risk that the U.S. might think. So I think the U.S. would, Michael Morell said is right that I think we have to confine the sanction relief only to North-South Detente.
Okay.
Kaesong Complex and
Mountain
Kumgangsan, yeah,
right?
and maybe if that small amount of corresponding measures something U.S. is willing to give North Korea, North Korean would not be coalesce with the U.S. to destroying the Yongbyon facilities. So, but I think they can coordinate these things. But at this point, with only some of North Korean behaviors of Yongbyon dismantlement, which is nuclear freeze, it is too much to give, relieving UN Security Council sanction resolutions for North Korea.
Director Morell cited the resumption of Kaesong Industrial Complex as an example of what Washington can give to Pyongyang in return for freeze. Here's a short clip on the history of now defunct industrial park in Kaesong.
The Kaesong Industrial Complex was one of the inter-Korean projects to be implemented under the June 15th Joint Declaration signed in 2000. Built in 2003, the industrial park sits on 93,000 square meters of land in the north's border city of Kaesong. Once touted as a symbol of inter-Korean cooperation, the project combined the South's capital and technology with the North's land and labor. A total of 124 South Korean companies operated in the complex, employing more than 50,000 North Korean workers. In 2015, its production value amounted to $515 million. The industrial complex was more than just a symbol of cross-border exchange for the North Korean leadership. It was a rare source of hard currency that annually brought $90 million to the regime. The industrial park also helped introduce elements of a market economy and capitalism to the communist state. However, South Korea suspended operations at the industrial park following the North's launch of the long-range missile Hwangmyeong-song-4 in February 2016. The complex gained renewed attention earlier this year after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un indicated his willingness to reopen it during his New Year's address.
아무런 전제 조건이나 대가 없이 개성공업지구와 금강산 관광을 재개할 용의가 있습니다.
In response, South Korean President Moon Jae-in welcomed the idea in a New Year's press conference. But it takes more than the commitment of the leaders of both Koreas to resume the project, as it is subject to the UN and US sanctions on the North. the industrial complex has recently come under the spotlight, with some suggesting that the U.S. could offer a restart of the park in return for North Korea's nuclear freeze.
Will there be days in your future that we are going to see the resumption of operation in Kaesong Industrial Complex and the reoperation of the Mountain Kumgang tour program?
The sanction relief requested by two Koreas is different. I mean, South Korea wants the U.S. to focus on the Kaesong and Kumgang Mountain tourism issues as relief of initial sanctions for North Korea. But I think North Korea wants sanction relief to be something related to the UN Security Council resolutions, so that it would be allowed to receive economic support from Russia and China, which would be
and it will resume its export, right? To China, Russia, and other countries.
So that it would be really directly related to what Kim Jong-un is planning as economic reform measures of North Korea.
United Nations Security Council resolution have prevented North Korea from exporting or importing these materials. Please tell me at least one of the items I'm going to mention maybe lifted by the United States if the negotiation between North Korea and the United States will be going smoothly. Export of coal and minerals by North Korea, export of fishery products, export of textile products, export of workers overseas, or the United States may lift the sanctions on importation of refined oil by North Korea. Any of these items has a chance to be lifted by the United States?
What U.S. experts are worrying and now also worrying about is what if the sanction relief is too much? And even though there is the clause that the sanctions will be recovered if they're not abiding by the duties of destroying nuclear facilities. Snapback clause. I don't think once the sanctions are relieved and economic exchanges between North Korea and other countries are on the mainstream and pathways and goes on, I don't think it's easy for international community to put sanctions back on North Korea. I don't think it will be taking much more time and make North Korea go back to the track of negotiation and follow through what should be the negotiation pattern for FFVD. I don't think it's easy for North Korea to do that later on. Ultimately, maybe President Trump can say that they have come up with some kind of small deal or big deal or nuclear freeze. Finally, documentized the nuclear freeze of North Korea. This is a success for his policy towards North Korea. Maybe President Trump can say that. But just making that as an interim objective, which might be the final objective, is I think it's not a good option for South Korea's security issues.
I see. But the United States, especially President Trump, may highlight it as a major achievement.
Sure.
Recently, the issue of North Korean sanctions has gone beyond the North Korea-U.S. negotiating table, with Japan claiming that South Korea lacks export control of strategic materials to the north. Here's more on the story.
Appearing on BS Fuji TV on July 7th, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said South Korea cannot be trusted to faithfully implement North Korea's sanctions, as he explained reasons for Japan's recent export restrictions on South Korea.
輸出管理というのは安全保障上の非常に機微なことでございますので。
In response to Japan's claim, the South Korean government called for a joint investigation by an international organization into whether Seoul or Tokyo has violated the international sanctions on North Korea.
우리 정부의 잘못이 없다는 결론이 나오면 일본 정부는 우리 정부에 대한 사과는 물론 보복적 성격의 수출 규제 조치도 즉각 철회해야 할 것입니다.
President Moon Jae-in said Tokyo's allegations were a grave challenge to the South Korean government.
일본 정부는 일방적인 압박을 거두고 이제라도 외교적 해결의 장으로 돌아오기 바랍니다.
Pyongyang's ruling party newspaper Nodong-Shinmun weighed in on July 14th, calling Japan's export control a political provocation to cover up its past wrongdoings. The U.S. State Department said Washington and Seoul are closely coordinating efforts to ensure full implementation of UN sanctions on the North, dismissing Japan's accusations. 10 reports submitted by a panel of experts in the UN Security Council from 2010 indicate that Japan exported prohibited items, including strategic equipment, to North Korea in breach of international sanctions. The reports also show Japan exported luxury goods to the North, including luxury sedans, cigarettes, and cosmetics. With the clear evidence of Japan's violations of international sanctions, its baseless accusations against South Korea lost credibility.
Now, everyone is worried about the deterioration of bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo after Japanese government's decision to impose export control on at least 3 items on South Korea, taking off South Korea from the white list. What do you see in the coming couple of weeks to happen? We are looking to the ASEAN Regional Forum to take place in Bangkok, Thailand, in early next month. Will there be any patch-up between South Korea and Japan in miraculous fashion, or Japan proposing Abe-Kim summit meeting, or trilateral coordinating meeting initiated by the mediation by the United States among South Korea, Japan, United States? Among all these scenarios likely to take place in ARF meeting in Bangkok next month, what is most likely to happen in your personal opinion?
It seems like for his militarist policies and attempts to revise the constitution, now the victims are not North Korea but South Korea. So it's kind of different pathways of foreign policy. But I think these kinds of tendencies of Prime Minister Abe will continue for a while in the future, I think. At ALF meeting, I think, as you mentioned, the U.S. arbitration is something we expect, but I don't think the U.S. wants to be directly intervene and restore the relationship between Japan and South Korea. Many regions, maybe President Trump is not willing to be a mediator somewhere, but rather have its U.S. interests be maximized throughout the bilateral relationship.
I see.
So it will cost South Korea and Japan bilaterally, but not much interest
encouraging
in
bilateral dialogue between South Korea and Japan,
Yes.
but no arbitration for trilateral meeting.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe it can talk about it, but it will be not as active as President Obama. I mean,
Okay.
President Obama at that time was dragging the arms of 2 countries and put them together, which was very awkward. But it worked anyhow, tentatively. But I don't think that would work at the ILF meeting.
All right. Well, Professor Kim Hyun-wook, thank you so much for sharing your insight and analysis with us on this program.
Thank you very much.
With working level and high level bilateral talks between North Korea and the United States likely to happen in the near future, we are seeing a lot of news coverage about it. Here are the latest news updates.
Pyongyang is warning that the Seoul-Washington joint military drills will affect the working level talks between it and the U.S., but President Trump highlighted again he's in no rush. Speaking in a cabinet meeting in Washington on Tuesday, Trump said he doesn't feel pressure to reach a quick denuclearization deal.
The relationship is very good. I think we've made tremendous progress on North Korea. And again, time is not of the essence, but I think good things will ultimately happen.
Seoul's Unification Ministry on Wednesday said it'll keep monitoring the movements from the north, but it stressed that what's most important is to quickly restart dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington.
The government expects working-level talks to be held soon, just as the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. agreed at Panmunjom, and it expects that those talks will lead to some fruitful outcomes.
On Tuesday, North Korea's foreign ministry denounced the U.S. for scheduling joint military exercises with South Korea and warned they could put the denuclearization talks at risk. Pyongyang warned that it'll determine whether to hold those talks after seeing what the U.S. does with the drills. The North has long criticized the drills as a rehearsal for war. North Korea has not responded to a U.S. proposal to hold a working-level meeting this week. Neither has the North's warning been directly acknowledged by the U.S. or South Korea, who are showing rather that their sole focus for now is to keep moving towards a new round of talks.
We'll come back next week with a lot of new topics on Korean Peninsula next week. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching.